A long campaign is now.
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is on assignment.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Villarreal here with my co-host Imran Siddiqui, and we've got a jam-packed show coming at you.
First up, anti-Islamization protests in Germany, how the terror attacks in France have affected the movement.
Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the U.S. prison there is still a sore spot. Is President Obama going to close it like he promised?
What Mr. Obama's State of the Union speech to Congress says about the rest of his presidency.
And unraveling the many disguises of HIV. Can scientists find a cure?
We're going on assignment with VOA, and we want you to join us. The center of Dresden has been a monument to Germany's reunification since the fall of the Berlin Wall, but recently the city has become a political battleground.
Right. For months, thousands of Germans have been protesting there against what they call the Islamization of the West. But the Charlie Hebdo attack in France has added fuel to that fire. VOA reporter Henry Ridgewell was in Dresden as people took to the streets.
To their detractors, they are known as Nazis in pinstripes, but their numbers are growing. 15,000 people joined the march in Dresden, part of a movement calling itself Patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the West.
How did the Pegida movement start?
It started as just a Facebook group. A few people joined together in Dresden city, voicing their concerns in a private Facebook page of what was happening to their country, based largely, I think, on the number of asylum places that Germany has pledged to offer, mainly to Syrian refugees fleeing the civil war there. So there are an estimated 25,000 people on the streets of Dresden taking part in this march. This is the format of the protest they've taken. They gather at about 6:30 in the evening after work, a Monday night, in the centre of the city, march fairly silently, although there are some more vocal elements who shout various slogans along the route. Then there's a rally at the end where they restate their principles, they restate their 19-point manifesto of their demands they have for the German government.
So what exactly is the Pegida movement demanding?
The title of it is about anti-Islamization. They want to ensure, they say, that Germany remains a country with Christian roots and is not driven towards Islamization. The thousands of people gathered here in Dresden are invoking the terrible events in Paris to support their cause. They warn that what happened in France could happen in Germany too.
With the recent terror attack in Paris, how have we seen the protest change?
It was a much more solemn start to the protest a few days after the Paris attacks happened. Organisers asked the marchers to wear black armbands. More people turned out in Dresden for the march, I think spurred on and using the Paris attacks to say that, well, this supports our argument.
Only those that show the true colors of the Third Reich, like I am on my jacket tonight, I'm wearing black, white, and red, stand for an unoppressed Germany.
He was suggesting that Germany really had been oppressed ever since the end of the Second World War, which of course Germany lost. It is rare these days to be confronted with those neo-Nazi sentiments. It's a very overtly not anti-Islam, they would insist, anti-Islamization, which they say is a different thing. They don't want Germany to become a Muslim nation. They claim it's on the road to that. Of course, Pegida's critics would say it's very much not on the road towards becoming a Muslim country.
Say it loud, say it clear, refugees are welcome here.
Counter-demonstrators heckled the marchers throughout the 2-kilometre route. Lines of riot police separated the two sides.
I'm here tonight to demonstrate against xenophobia and against things that, especially for Dresden, that I simply can't support, as there is absolutely no threat posed by Islam.
The anti-Pegida demonstrators gathered in several groups. They heckled the marchers, and many of the marchers tried to answer them back, but the organisers of the march tried to prevent any kind of conflict that was taking place, and there were several hundred riot police deployed as well throughout the city to separate the two sides.
With numbers swelling on both sides, it is a divide that Germany's politicians are having to confront.
And how has the German government responded to this movement?
Very strongly. it is refusing to engage them politically. It's refusing to hold talks with Pegida. Chancellor Merkel has accused those who attend these marches of having hatred in their hearts.
Deutschland gibt es zwar die Demonstrationsfreiheit, aber es ist kein Platz.
There's freedom of assembly in Germany, but there's no place for incitement and lies about people who come to us from other countries. And therefore, everyone needs to be careful that they're not taken advantage of by the people who organize such events.
They have said that Germans should not attend these marches and they will not engage them politically. And that's been a controversial tactic by the government in some ways, supported, I think, by the majority of Germans. But there are people who do think that there isn't a political representation of right-wing views, if you like, in Germany, and there hasn't been since the end of the Second World War. I think we may see that as the future of the Pegida movement, of it becoming a more legitimate and more politically recognized group that will seek some kind of representation within the state parliament or even the Bundestag in Berlin.
It's been 13 years since the U.S. set up the Guantanamo military prison. The number of detainees there is now under 125, less than a fifth of the men it once held.
But for President Obama, that's still too many. He's committed to closing the facility, a vow he made in 2009, but can he do it? VOA White House correspondent Aru Pandey tells me he's trying.
At its height, Guantanamo held 779 inmates. And the interesting fact here is the majority of them, more than 500, were actually transferred out during the Bush administration. And again, when President Obama came into office, he said this is one of the first things he did in the first month in office, saying, I'm going to start taking action, taking steps to close it. So you have this huge facility now that is whittled down to 122 detainees.
Matthew Levitt, counterterrorism fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, says the issue of trying Guantanamo prisoners on U.S. soil has been politicized from the beginning.
I think the court system is capable. I think that our prison system is capable. I don't think it would put Americans at any more risk than we are now, by virtue of having other people like them in the country, and I don't think that there is a real risk.
Ultimately, keeping Guantanamo open as the number of prisoners is whittled down may be difficult due to the cost, at nearly $3 million a year per prisoner. But Levitt says lawmakers should not make cost the rationale for closing the facility. Instead, they should shut Guantanamo because it's the right thing to do.
And we have had a shakeup of power recently in Congress. Now we have Republicans in control of both houses. How will that play into this?
Well, it's probably likely going to be much more difficult. I mean, you have some of the incoming new members of Congress have already said that they want to make it even harder. They want to make it even more difficult, even though the ban is still in place. And obviously, they're citing concerns like you can't have men with links to Al-Qaeda or suspected links to Al-Qaeda, men who are deemed to be dangerous, back on U.S. soil. But the argument against that the President Obama has put forth and other experts have put forth is that the U.S. Criminal justice system is more than capable of handling it. President Obama has said we have murderers, we even have terrorists. We've tried terrorists on U.S. soil and imprisoned them. And to say that we can't bring this small group of people back to the U.S. so we can close down that facility, it's just not, in Mr. President Obama's eyes, it's just not really a real argument anymore. We have tried individuals who are, officials say, more dangerous on U.S. soil.
Now, aside from the security concerns, what about the symbol of Guantanamo around the world? The longer that it continues to stay open, what kind of effect does that have on the reputation of the White House?
Well, obviously, a huge one. I mean, again, that was one of the main initiatives that President Obama put forth. He ran on, and when he immediately got into office, was we're going to close it. This is not only is it an embarrassment, but again, it looks like the U.S. is flouting the rule of law, which we have, and it is not right to hold people who have never been charged. I mean, how can we hold other nations accountable when we have Guantanamo still open? And that's what the president has said. So, I mean, he only has 2 years left in office. So obviously he has a lot of issues that he wants to tackle before he leaves. But this is, I think, in terms of, in foreign policy as well, a big one. He's made that pledge and promise, and he has 2 years to really get that through. And you see that you see these transfers that are happening, and you're seeing that they've really picked up the pace.
Trying to get closer to that. Is it realistic?
I don't know. It depends on Congress. It's Congress and President Obama being able to sit down and figure out, what do we do? How do we do this? Because, I mean, I can't imagine that people in Congress think that this is something that should remain open as well. Again, the majority of detainees were transferred out under President Bush's administration. So it's a matter of figuring out what to do and coming to a common ground. I mean, the only option that President Obama has is to use executive action to somehow get around this ban, but I don't think he really wants to do that. I think he wants to come up with a workable solution, working with members of Congress.
Right, a bipartisan solution
right,
that everyone can sign on to.
Exactly.
That was VOA's Aru Pandey, and Aru, of course, will continue following all things Obama for us.
We are taking a break now. When we come back, more Washington politics as President Obama lays out his vision for his last 2 years as president. You're watching On Assignment.
Domestic issues were the focus of President Barack Obama's recent State of the Union speech to Congress and the American people. But with war and terrorism continuing to sprout in the Middle East, foreign policy was also at the fore. President Obama has just 2 years left in office. No surprise then that political pundits are looking ahead to 2016 when the U.S. presidency is once again up for grabs. And joining me right now is our VOA's national correspondent, Jim Malone. Thank you so much for joining me.
You bet.
To ask you a short question, please tell us, what was the speech about and is there any impact?
Yeah, I can boil it down to this. I'm still here. The president wanted to remind everyone that even though Republicans had these huge gains in the November elections, he's still president. He can still act on his own. And I think most importantly what these addresses do, and why they're still so important, especially to presidents, it gives them the ability to build public opinion. That still matters. He was really speaking beyond members of Congress because guess what? A lot of Republicans thought this was a no-go from the start. But if he can build public support for his policies, he's going to have a chance to face off with them, maybe get some compromises. And the other issue is his poll numbers are getting better, the economy is improving, so his position has actually gotten a little stronger.
So talk about poll numbers. If the poll numbers are higher, does that mean another Democrat coming in?
Well, it certainly would help, but you know what? History argues that it's very difficult for one party to keep the White House for 3 consecutive terms. The last time that happened was 1988, George H.W. Bush. Certainly the Democrats feel they have a strong candidate in the wings with Hillary Clinton, assuming she runs, but Republicans seem almost frantic to get their race going for their nomination for 2016. They see an excellent opportunity to take the White House back in 2016, and you know what? They know how important it is. If you don't have that bully pulpit, that White House authority, sometimes you get bound down in Congress. You can't get a lot done. So they're really going to be loaded for bear for 2016 to try to take the White House away from the Democrats.
What do you think was the response of the Republicans?
Not very optimistic. I think the Republicans were a little dismayed. In fact, they had to go out of their way in their responses to remind everyone, hey, you know what? We won the elections last year and won them convincingly. It was a terrible blow to the Obama presidency. But here's the thing for the Democrats, this president is not acting that way. If anything, he seems unburdened, liberated even, willing to act to buttress his legacy in his last 2 years and take on the Republicans where he can, and threatening the use of these congressional vetoes. And so far, it doesn't look like Republicans would have enough votes to override those vetoes. So that sets up more clashes, but it also sets up the potential for possible cooperation. Why? Republicans want to show they can govern because that would help them in their quest to take back the White House in 2 years.
He talked about a lot of things, but in particular, the point towards foreign policy when he mentioned that from Paris to Pakistan to America, we need to fight terrorism and Congress must act on that. Where do you think that would lead to?
Well, they want to get congressional authorization to go after ISIS, the Islamic State. But you know, if you look at the foreign policy context of the speech, it was, you know, about a third, maybe less. So he was really focused on the domestic agenda, and there has been criticism from some notable Republicans in Congress that they're not strong enough right now in confronting ISIS, and they're not talking enough about the possibility of needing U.S. forces on the ground to confront the Islamic State fighters. So far, for Democrats and the president, that's a non-starter, but there's no doubt this issue is going to continue to dog the White House for the next 2 years, but there's some slight area there where they could agree to cooperate on this issue, I think.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on that. Thank you so much for joining us. VOA National Correspondent Jim Malone. We're taking a break now. On the other side, unraveling the mystery that is the HIV virus. You're watching On Assignment.
Researchers have a new lead on why HIV has been so hard to cure, and they're looking at a new strategy to drive the virus from the body.
Antiviral medications have helped control the virus that causes AIDS, but they haven't been able to eliminate it. So the hunt for a cure continues. VOA's Steve Baragona tells On Assignment's Rebecca Ward about the new scientific advancements.
Basically, the whole paradigm for the last, couple of decades has been to treat the disease, to turn it into a chronic condition, rather than a death sentence. It's become something that the drugs have gotten really good, and you can live for a long time with HIV, but we have not been able to cure the disease.
So from your report, it sounds like what they're trying to do is, and it sounds strange to me, but coax the disease out in order for the immune system to actually be able to attack it.
Yeah. When you're taking HIV medications, you can keep the virus from making copies of itself. What they don't do is get the virus where it hides. HIV is very sneaky this way. You can take the drugs and keep the virus down, but a few copies of the virus duck into hiding in some of your immune system cells. They've been doing these experiments to try and coax these viruses out, but when they do, the viruses go crazy.
As soon as patients stop taking the drugs, virus comes out of this latent state and starts to replicate again. And that's why you can't cure anybody with the drugs.
The problem is that when the virus comes out of hiding, the body's immune system doesn't recognize it. So what's happened, what they've discovered in this paper, is that when the virus goes into hiding, it's put on a disguise.
And so the researcher that you spoke to over at Johns Hopkins, what has he recently discovered, and how is that going to help cure AIDS?
Right. So Dr. Silicano has found that the virus actually puts on that disguise very early before it even goes into hiding, so that when it comes out, basically every virus that manages to go into hiding has a disguise. If you get the virus very early in treatment, or very early in the course of infection, you can get it before it has time to turn on these disguises. But we're talking about like early in the first couple of weeks, and that doesn't happen in a lot of cases. So you take the drugs, and basically all the viruses that are running around in your bloodstream, you can wipe them out. They're fine. But those few viruses that early on in the process snuck into your immune cells and went into hiding, the drugs aren't going to do anything to them. So as soon as you stop taking the drugs, those disguised viruses pop out, and the immune system looks at them and goes, well, you're fine, and lets them go. But the good news is you can teach the immune system to recognize those viruses.
But there are other cells that see different parts of the virus that have not mutated. And those cells can be, still can be effective. Now they have to be stimulated in the right way. But once they're stimulated, they can now recognize and eliminate these infected cells.
It's not clear yet if this will do the trick. If it has another hiding place, the way that you kind of scare it out of hiding won't work.
Half the battle is killing the cells once you turn the virus back on. Probably the harder part is actually just turning the virus back on. We still are looking for ways to do that.
If they're hiding in the immune cells, but they're also hiding in some other kind of cells, if you scare them out of the immune cells, the ones hiding someplace else, they're fine. They're not going to be affected.
Steve, how did you find out about this story? It's so fascinating, this kind of research.
Yeah, this stuff is going on all the time in the major medical journals. This one was published in the journal Nature. It's one of these things where if you see a paper coming out in Nature or Science or something, it's probably a fairly big deal.
And so a good indication that at least some promising research is coming along.
Yeah, very promising.
VOA's Steve Baragona. Despite medical advances, HIV/AIDS is still a huge health problem. The WHO estimates that in 2013, 35 million people were living with the disease worldwide.
Well, we are shifting gears now, so to speak, to America's first major car show of the year. We're talking about the Detroit Auto Show, a bunch of new models on display by automakers from around the world.
The trend towards electric power continues, but lower gas prices are keeping cars with internal combustion engines in the spotlight. VOA's George Putich has all the shiny new details.
No one trend is taking center stage at this year's Detroit Auto Show, says Cars.com analyst Aaron Bragman.
We're seeing a lot of variety of product, luxury vehicles, electric vehicles, concept cars now apparently are making a comeback. So there's no one theme except that, the industry is back.
General Motors attracted a lot of attention with the prototype of its new electric car, the Chevy Bolt. With a respectable projected range of 320 kilometers, it is well within the requirements of most of the world's commuters. At the price of about $30,000, it may be the first fully electric car attractive to everyday drivers. Presenting it at the show, General Motors CEO Mary Barra sought to assure the audience that this is for real.
Trust me, this is no stripped-down science experiment. The Bolt EV concept offers unexpected functionality and technology with proportions and flexibility of a crossover. It's an all-electric vehicle for the real world.
However, the Bolt will not be available to consumers before 2017. Sooner than that, maybe even this year, the U.S. market will see another futuristic car. The Stratti from Local Motors, a small car maker, has a 3D printed body and a motor and suspension borrowed from the French Renault. Local Motors CEO Jay Rogers says printing the electric car takes about 44 hours, but it is done by a single machine.
We hope by the end of the year to be closer to 24 hours, and then we'd hope to be able to get it down to somewhere between 10 and 12 hours total.
A lot of new models with gas engines come from the market's high end. Mercedes brought the new four-door midsize sedan, the GLE Coupe, while Porsche showed a new 911 Targa 4 with a whopping 430 horsepower. Ford presented its first muscle car in more than a decade with a 3.5-liter V6 engine and more than 600 horsepower. Not wanting to be excluded from the club, Japan's Acura unveiled its super hybrid NSX with a V6 engine and 3 electric motors, providing more than 550 horsepower. The NSX will run in 4 different modes, each with a different sound level. George Putich, VOA News, Washington.
Whew, so many fun cars at that show. I have to say that I never thought that I would live to see the day when we would have a car come from a printer.
Amazing. Wait till you see a car that drives itself. That's going to be a Google car, and you're going to see me in that car pretty soon.
So you're going to be in there just typing away on
literally
your computer.
hands-free.
That will be amazing. Yeah. We really are in the future, aren't we? Mm-hmm. All right, well, sadly, we are out of time for Auto Talk, but you don't have to be too sad because we're always online at voanews.com and Facebook. Just search for VOA on Assignment and tell us what you think about the reports we bring you each week.
And on behalf of everybody here in Washington, thank you so much for watching On Assignment. Catch you next week.